Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am joined today by an awesome guest who I so love and admire the work that she does to help so many different size businesses and so many different types of businesses. She has a really clear way of thinking when it comes to strategy and tangible growth. She specifically writes that she works with fast-growing small to mid-sized companies. That's something I'm so excited to dive into today. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Paige Annunziato. She is the creator of her management and project management consultancy agency based in Denver. She focuses on helping businesses to improve their operations and achieve their strategic goals. Her expertise includes project management, which for sure we're going to talk about, process improvement, and organizational change management. In addition to her consulting work, she also loves to hike and rock climb in Colorado. I don't know what it is out there. Everybody who lives in Colorado is an outdoorsy person. So Paige's company is called Panoramic Projects. There's so much that I've been excited about today's interview. So without any further ado, let's dive into my interview today with Paige Annunziato. Paige, I'm excited that you're here. Welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. Excited to be here.
Heck yeah. So obviously, I read your bio. I'm excited about this. I gave a shout out to you being in Colorado, but I'd love for you to fill in the gaps. Tell us, who is Paige?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked about in my free time, huge hiker, rock climber, everything like that. What really got me intrigued and interested in starting a process improvement consulting firm is I really felt like I kept hitting a wall at every company I worked at. I worked at a lot of different companies, from software, IT, security and compliance, and it felt like the companies had so many pain points, and it would take us 6 months, a year to launch a new project. And I thought that there has to be a better, more streamlined way to do this, to keep stakeholders happy, keep customers informed, and really just make the process a lot smoother. And that was really what defined and ultimately brought my company to light, was really all of those different experiences I've had over the past few years.
Yeah, I love how that timeline, really the speed is something that drives you. That's something that really struck me the more that I researched you and obviously your work, is that you love that accelerated growth and you love helping other companies do that. Talk to me about where that was born, because it's very easy and very plausible. Now, obviously, there's an inner entrepreneur in you that knew you had to do it a better way, but it's very easy and plausible for a lot of employees to be like, it is what it is. Not even employees, but business owners. It is what it is. Talk to us about that drive for that accelerated growth in action.
I think it really comes, honestly, from my childhood. I remember growing up with my mom. My mom is extremely process focused. When we would run our errands, we would always start at a certain time of day. My mom would map out our whole plan of, if we're going to the grocery store, then we're going to the post office, then we're going to the doctor. Everything would systematically need to make sense so we wouldn't backtrack. And I remember everything having to be so seamlessly organized. And then in college was when I was first introduced to process improvement. And I remember my professor saying, by helping a manufacturing company, they saved $20 million per year by taking 2 inches off of the paper of a chip. It was like part of a chip. And that was crazy to me, that you can make an entire career around helping companies be more efficient and help them to really have that cost savings aspect, which I felt like as a project manager, it's always hard to feel like, yes, the work I'm doing is impactful, it's relevant. So I think really a combination of like childhood and really early adult experiences really led me to enjoy the industry.
Yeah, I love how you tied that in. It's actually really fun for me to start there as far as your childhood plus your college experiences. And you already brought up your working, your 9-to-5 experience. That's fascinating for me to start with, because I'd love to hear your insights at that really high level overview before we start going into the small, medium-sized businesses. What are those blocks? Why do things move slowly?
That's a great question. I was actually just talking to a client a little while ago about doing a software implementation project to them. And we talked about prioritization. And I think prioritization is the biggest reason that things move slowly. I love to use the example of ordering an Uber. So I think at a very high level, people can say that if the Uber app crashes and no one can order an Uber, that immediately needs to be prioritized at a very high level, because if no one can use the app, then no one can drive. But then I think everyone starts to have all these different opinions about, well, what if we want to add new features to the app? Well, what if we want to reduce costs? Or what if we want to add something? And I think getting people to agree and have confidence and have alignment to move forward is really the biggest thing that causes things to take longer.
Yeah, I love that overview. And especially because even just with that simple Uber example, you've already alluded to real life business problems, which is part of the company wants to cut costs. Part of the company, the developers are itching to launch new features. I'm sure that the QA department is trying to fix existing bugs before doing anything else. So there's all these competing opinions and competing missions as well. And it's something we all face. You are a fellow entrepreneur. We all face this in our own businesses, is those competing opinions. Do I try to go get more customers and clients? Do I try to service my existing client base? Do I try to drum up referrals? Should I start doing social media? Should I start a podcast? All these different conflicting questions, which, Paige, it's fun to have a specialist here with us. Where the heck do we start?
Yes, that is a great question. I would say the simplest answer is to always think about who is the end user of whatever it is that you're creating. Who is the ultimate customer that you're trying to serve? And if you're going to work on something, what is their overall opinion, feedback, results? Because they're ultimately going to be driving the financial backing of your company. So if a customer is coming to you and saying, I need this feedback, and then if you're getting a larger amount of customers that are saying, yes, this feature is broken, or, I'm really loving your podcast, like, let's get advertising, let's get things behind it. I think it's always going to be very revenue driven, because if you go in too many different directions, you don't serve anyone well, which really kind of comes back to specializing.
Yeah, it's funny. It's something that I've learned to do in my own entrepreneurial journey is I look at my to-do list, because let's face it, our to-do list is a series of projects, or one big project as we grow our business. And I have a tendency to ask myself the question of which of these tasks actually matters. And you bring up revenue, for example. If I'm in a season of my business growth where revenue is a priority, those tasks jump to the front. Now, we've all heard different types of prioritization hacks. Like, one of them that I hold near and dear to my heart is urgent versus important. It's something I always have to force myself back into. But Paige, I'm curious what you've got in your arsenal when it comes to helping businesses prioritize.
Yes, I think the most important thing you can do to prioritize is to not task switch. I think when we task switch, it can take us an hour to get back on track. I typically like to use a Kanban board every day, and I only want to have 2 to 4 things in progress that I'm working on for the whole day. And I'll typically give myself, typically about 2 hours per task, and I will not allow myself to switch. So I'm really able to block. If I'm going to be writing articles, I'm just writing articles for 2 hours. If I'm doing research and analysis, I'm just doing that for 2 hours. And that allows me to prioritize and make sure that the work is quality, and I'm not necessarily going to get confused or backtrack or do that context switching.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to call it out for listeners, because listeners have heard me say this a million times. Batch productivity totally changed my life, totally changed my businesses. I love hearing you stick to that. But Paige, I'm sure in your line of work, you hear people say all the time, oh, I'm great at multitasking. People who jump in and out of their inbox. I'd love to hear your take on that. And also, since you did bring it up, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your personal strategies. You mentioned the Kanban board, but people may not be familiar with us. So expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your first point about enjoying multitasking, I work a lot with CEOs that wear a lot of hats. I wouldn't say they enjoy multitasking, but they really do it. And I would say it's a core aspect of when I first start working with a company is working directly with the CEO to break that habit. I come across a lot of CEOs that are doing 10, 20 different things every day. And we really try to train them out of that by really developing better communication skills to delegate tasks to people and come up with a really central place to see everything, whether that might be a project management software, so that they feel comfortable knowing that they still have that high level oversight, but they aren't in emails, they aren't managing a software team, they are also doing marketing, but really trying to help them to practice at their highest level of skill set and what they're best at.
Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to make sure we also cover that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. For a Kanban board, that is a terminology from the lean process. It was originally brought up in manufacturing. Essentially, what Kanban means is limiting your work in progress. They found that when you're on a factory line, if you are trying to push out too many different systems and processes at once, it can get very clunky. Essentially, it's trying to limit the amount of work in progress. So if you're looking at a physical board, you typically only want to have about 2 to 4 tasks in progress at any given time. If you have more tasks, it can get kind of convoluted, you can get kind of bogged down. So it's important to keep those on the backlog until they're truly ready to be worked on.
Yeah, I love that. Part of me is, I'm wondering, Paige, personally, I'm just like, do I use a Kanban board? Is Trello one such example of a Kanban board?
Yeah, it is. There's a lot out there. Trello, ClickUp, Monday.com, they do a ton of marketing. Asana, any of those are great options.
Awesome. Yeah. So all of you listeners who are always looking for tools, like Paige is in this. She works with businesses of all different sizes, and you see those tools that are accessible to literally everybody you can leverage for your own growth. So yeah, I love the shout out for a lot of those tools. More and more I'm hearing, people are just gravitating towards those same tools because they're just really good. And a lot of them are free, by the way. Asana, free. Trello, free. ClickUp, free. So I love that overview. And it's cool to hear it from you, someone who's actually in the industry. Paige, I've got to ask you this because there's so many ways that we could take the direction. But one thing that I really loved about as I was getting to know your work is that one thing you list as your zone of genius is that you're really good. I already know, as someone who gets to interview you, you're obviously really good at actively listening, which I totally dig. But the other part of that is that you note that part of your job is to ask really good questions and to ask the right questions. Talk to us about that line of questioning. What do you see people get wrong when it comes to their thought process that you snap them out of with good questioning? And also, where do you find the inspiration for asking those right questions?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question too, Brian. I think that, have you ever heard of the role visionary versus implementer? So I think I work a lot with visionaries, CEOs that have all these great ideas. And when it comes to asking questions, I am more on the implementer side. I want to really understand what is the biggest pain point? What is the new process, project, product that we're trying to roll out? What's our timeline? What's our budget? When I'm asking questions, I'm in a sense really building a statement of work and a whole complete project plan. So I can take all of that visionary information and I can actually translate it into step-by-step instructions that will actually lead us to our goal. So everything I'm doing, I'm trying to figure out, how do I make employees' lives easier? How do I make their companies more profitable? And how do I get them more of their time back? Is really the 3 things I'm always thinking about in the back of my mind.
I love that because years ago, I actually heard in the world of politics, every political campaign has something called the red team, where the red team listens to the marketing department, the messaging department, and the red team's only job is to poke holes at the way that they're currently thinking. And that's a little bit about what I hear from you is that if you're working with visionaries, you have to come in with your implementation hat on and be like, well, hey, let's actually get this in a way that we can act on it and that we can actually execute on this. But Paige, it begs the question for me is I'm just like, what if the opposite is true? Do you ever run into the fact where people are really great at implementing, but they need those visionary type of questions? Or maybe as entrepreneurs, we're just always full of ideas. I'm curious your take on that.
Yes. I would say that probably 90% of people I work with are visionary. And I think interestingly enough, I think visionary people are also very detail oriented. They sometimes have a hard time thinking high level, which you think would be kind of opposite. But I actually don't run into a lot of people that are implementers. If they were, I would imagine they probably wouldn't need consulting services.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's as I think about my own entrepreneurial journey and the people that I've been able to hire over the years, they've always complimented on that side of it because you're right. Entrepreneurs, I very rarely meet an entrepreneur that has a shortage of ideas. Talk to me about the implementation side of it then. What makes you an implementer and what makes implementers successful at this stuff that's a different skill set from the visionaries?
Mm-hmm. I think that visionaries are great. Having a lot of ideas is amazing because that's the foundation of building a house is an idea. I think where an implementer comes in is they're starting to set the framing, really put the house together. For me, that really starts with, asking my questions and then deciding on, okay, how are we going to communicate? Communication is probably 80% of any kind of success rate around, implementing a new project or a new process. And from there, it's really holding everyone accountable to learn a new process. If I'm implementing a software on a team, I have to make sure that everyone, has buy-in. They want to use the new software. They want new metrics. They want to learn a new process. So that is a lot of kind of the training and coaching side of implementation. And then I also think that there is quite a bit of an ongoing maintenance phase for implementing a new process. The hardest part of it is really change management. People can be afraid when, a new consultant, a new project manager comes onto the team and wants to shake things up. So I really try to first listen, understand historically what worked and what didn't. How can I use the strengths of everyone I'm working with to really kind of help motivate and encourage them to implement their own ideas too. So it's more of kind of that coaching mindset.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And one thing that I really can't help but think as I get to ask you these questions and hear your perspective on all that is how interesting it is that we start our conversation by talking about implementing fast and growing faster, which obviously every single business wants. And then at the same time, we're talking about doing less, focusing on one or two things. And obviously we always hear that phrase, less is more, but it sounds to me like that's part of your strategy is do less to move faster. Is that part of how you view these?
I would say 100%. I love lean. And I mean, the core concept of lean is to eliminate waste, eliminate anything that's not serving your customer, and to always focus on doing the highest impact work you can. I think that helps prevent burnout too for team members. No one ever wants to feel like the work they're doing is irrelevant or unimportant. Everyone wants to feel like it's high value. I think that's why startups tend to attract the hardest working people because everyone feels excited. They feel like they're their own mini business owner. They want to really support the mission of the company, make the company successful.
Yeah, and when it comes to eliminating waste, you kind of already showed us an example of that by using the CEO example of getting him or her out of their inbox, getting him or her not managing a software team in addition to their CEO duties. What are some of those things? Specifically, I'm really curious about the small business side of your clientele. What are some of those aspects that you realize, hey, that's just waste. You've already showed us the bright side, which is that doesn't serve your clients. It doesn't enable your business growth. What are some of those common things you identify?
Yes, absolutely. The number one reason that I wanted to get out of a corporate job and start my own company was meetings. Meetings can be a tremendous waste of time. Making employees sit in meetings for 8 hours a day is exhausting and really doesn't accomplish anything. That is a huge area that I look at to do a complete audit of at companies. I often will recommend only having meetings twice a week and trying to box your meetings. Like maybe you'll have 4 to 5 hours of meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're doing heads down, focused work. You don't have to stop, go to a meeting, and then kind of get back in the flow. I think too, making sure that meetings, they're very focused. There aren't a lot of side conversations. People that go to the meeting are there because they have something to ask. They have something to contribute. I would say that is a huge way to cost save.
Yeah, it's funny. You and I share something that you put us in a corporate environment and we will just go bananas saying, oh my gosh, this could be done so much better. You make me think back to my 10 months of when I worked in healthcare and I spent probably 80% of my time sitting in meetings. Now, bear in mind, I was an entry-level employee. I was just like, why are you paying me to sit here? So one of the things that I've implemented in many of my businesses, a lot of our businesses use Slack, is that we just use program called Geekbot. It's free, and you can do daily stand-up meetings there. So you just type it when you get a chance to get in there. If you have relevant updates, key part there, if you have relevant updates, you can jot them in there, and the whole team sees relevance that are only updates that are only relevant to them. So I love that approach. I want to ask you about the more intentional side of this, because obviously behind all of this, you talked about, you can't start building a house until you have the intention of building a house. I always am a proponent. Listeners have heard me say a million times about, I do Sunday coffee dates with myself, where I just sit down and I check in with me and I check in about my businesses, the direction that I'm heading. Paige, what's your process for your clients, for yourself, for the businesses that you've worked with? What are those timeframes in which you do those check-ins? You make sure that you're on track according to the intentions that you originally set out for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a great question. I have monthly deliverables that I make with each client, and we meet every month to make sure that we are hitting each milestone that we're working to accomplish. I also like to ask for feedback during those monthly meetings with clients. What's worked well? What is easing the burden on you? How is your stress level? What can I improve on? And clients really like that constant iteration and feedback. The milestones, the different process we work on, those will change over time, and clients like to get a preview of what they're getting. They like to check those boxes, and they like to know that we're really marching forward or making progress. I think sometimes it can be scary to hire someone and to not know what you're going to get. And I like to be very transparent with my results, what I'm going to do, how long it's going to take. And I find that makes clients feel a lot more comfortable in the process.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do love that you didn't even hesitate. You already had that timeline in place, which is every month you have those deliverables and you do check in and say, are we on the right track? What's changing over time? I want to ask you this, Paige, because having worked with as many entrepreneurs as I have throughout the past 15 years, one thing that I see, and I'm sure you see it even more than I do, is people resistant to change, especially when it comes to new technologies, new ways of doing things. I know a lot of small business owners who say, I'm using MailChimp and it doesn't do what I need to do, but I don't want to change to something else. Obviously, process improvement comes with change. What are some of those ways that you've helped businesses overcome the obstacle, the hurdles, the pain points that come with change?
Mm-hmm. I love that you asked this question. I think change management is my favorite part of process improvement because it's the most challenging. I think it's the thing you never get best at. My first project I ever worked on was implementing a software called Jira. For those that don't know, it's a very technical software used by engineers, and I had to teach over 50 people in the company to use the software. I encountered everything from fear to tears to anger at trying to help people use this new software. And what I really learned about change management is you have to customize your strategy to meet people where they're at. I would sit down with small groups of people to do training on the software, and I would always ask, what's your learning style? Do you want me to go through the software with you? Do you want to screen share? Are you more of a hands-on learner and you can go through the software with me and ask questions? And I found that by really understanding, how does someone learn? How do they like to be communicated with? What's their personality style? It made it so much easier for them to drop their guard and want to actually work with me. And I think too, checking in and first building rapport with someone and asking, I know this is scary. How are you feeling about this change? What are your reservations? How can we work together on this for you to feel confident and capable going through this? And that is probably the best learning experience I ever had, was implementing a software that no one wanted to use.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's fun for me because clearly not only do you love fast growth, but clearly we touch on something that you absolutely love, which is that change. And it brings me into another topic, which is knowing how you've worked with companies at all different sizes. I'm super curious from your vantage point, what you see as far as what changes from the small business problems more to the medium-sized business problems. Because a lot of entrepreneurs have the tendency to think, oh, when I cross X milestone, maybe it's, $10,000 a month, your first 6 figures, your first 7 figures. They think that the problem's solved, but you're very experienced here. You know that the problems never stop. What are some of those things that you see change as organizations, businesses, entrepreneurs grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think of those young startup companies, they're kind of like the Wild West. Everyone is excited but no one's really sure what's going on. There's no metrics, there's no data. Everyone kind of just goes in 10 different directions and hope things work out. Sometimes that's amazing. Sometimes it leads people to be visionaries and create really innovative, cool solutions. As companies grow, they start to get a lot more constraints and control put on them. Typically, companies become more top-down. I was at a very large company that was about 3,000 employees, and I wanted to make one change to a software, and I think I had to ask 10 different people and submit a request form. So I think they each have their own challenges. I think ideally you want to give people that autonomy in a startup, but you also do want to have checks and balances that large companies have to verify the result is what you're looking for, and it's not going against the company mission or going against serving that customer.
Yeah, one thing I love about what you just shared with us is steal those checks and balances, steal the operations, steal the processes that bigger businesses have. Those are in place for a reason. And us as small business owners, we may not have all the different departments, all the different resources that big businesses have. But Paige, you're right. We can look at them for inspiration, which leads me to, it's a quote that I've loved this year. I actually did a Mindset and Motivation Monday quote about it, or episode about it, which is a quote from Johan Cruyff where he said, every disadvantage has its advantage. And when we talk about business growth, I'm sure you've seen this on so many different levels that small businesses, yeah, we have those disadvantages of a lack of resources, but that brings with it other advantages. Talk to me about some of those things that you've seen.
Yes, I think this ties into things don't take as long to get done at small companies. You're given a lot more freedom. If you want to explore an idea and really implement it, you can. You don't necessarily have a board you have to go to or, taking a whole year to get a new project approved. And I think smaller companies, they're able to take more risk. They don't necessarily have the branding or the presence of a large company. And if they make a mistake, it's not Twitter. It's not going to be, in the news for everyone to see. And sometimes having that kind of less visibility can really work in your favor.
Yeah, and it's something that former podcast guest Nat Harward, shout out to Nat. I always love all of our guests. Paige, I can't wait to bring in your lessons in future episodes as well. But Nat once said to me pretty recently, he said, as small business owners, we have to take advantage of low stake learning. And that's something that I hear from you is act fast, put your intentions in place, reverse engineer it, put that strategy and intention in place, and then go after it. Because you're right, the stakes are lowest at the beginning, which leads me to, we could talk about this stuff for days. Paige, I love your real passion for all things project management. This time is flying by, but I want to ask you with regards to those small businesses, to the entrepreneurs who are listening and they're going, okay, clearly Paige is way more intentional and strategic when it comes to executing on these things, which is why it's no mistake. You probably execute on things much faster than most. What's something actionable that entrepreneurs can do today to start exercising these types of approaches in your perspective to growth?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that has helped me with starting my company is to be very mindful about my decisions and to really research fully. I recently brought on a marketing company to help me with lead generation. I probably interviewed about 6 or 7 different marketing companies, and I went with the one that really fit my budget. It fit my specific niche really well, and it was going to give me the quality that I was looking for. And I think that as a business owner, it's stressful to make decisions and really deciding, what is your process? What are you willing to compromise on? Like, what metrics do you have in place? It makes it a lot easier to make decisions and then to feel confident that those decisions are going to be the right ones for your company. I think too, one other thing is don't be afraid to ask for advice. I ask other entrepreneurs for advice. I read all the time, constantly learn, because what we know now will change in the future too.
Yes, a brilliant question. Paige, one of your superpowers is asking the right questions. I want to call it out for listeners yet again. The question that you revealed that you asked yourself is, what am I willing to compromise on? Because everything is a question of give or take. Do I want to onboard a new marketing company? Well, that comes at the cost of dollars that you have to pay to them, but what is the benefit that it brings in? So I love a little bit of a reveal about your own processes right there. So that's super helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Paige, I also want to ask you this as we come towards the end of this interview. I know know how much Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur listeners love implementing tools, and you already gave a shout out to a few of them: Asana, Trello, Monday, ClickUp. What are some tools that you think every business owner should have in place? Obviously, having gone through your website, which we'll talk about at the end, panoramic-projects.com, having gone through there, I know how much you believe that every business should have a product or project management tool in place. What's one tool that you think every business owner should have in their business?
Yes, great question. I currently use ClickUp. ClickUp is the top-rated project management software that's free for the first 3 users. I know a lot of us business owners are on a budget. If it's just you, if it's maybe just you and a VA, ClickUp is easy to use. It doesn't require any fancy customization. So I really like ClickUp for that reason.
Heck yeah, that is something I can personally attest to as well. I love ClickUp. It actually, Paige, I was going to say how I use it, but I'm more curious about your perspective. What are some of the ways that you use it in your business?
Yes, I definitely love a good to-do list like you do, Brian. Big fan of using that method of keeping tasks organized. I also use ClickUp as my CRM. A lot of people ask me, do you have a separate CRM for tracking clients? I like less software, so I have a separate board in ClickUp where I track all of prospects, who I need to follow up with, who's in my pipeline. And then I have a third board for current clients, tracking their milestones, deliverables, feedback, everything like that. So I love keeping everything in one place.
Yeah, and in addition to that, for listeners who are tuning in that haven't used ClickUp before or any good project management software, I'm just going to keep tooting the horn of ClickUp. I promise we're not sponsored by ClickUp, but Paige, I'm sure you feel like that sometimes too when you talk about ClickUp. But we also use it. It has a documents hub. So in my online fitness company, Effect, with Mark Zimmerman, we keep all of our client testimonials in there. So when we need it for marketing purposes, it already lives inside of ClickUp. We don't have to go hunting for it. We have a dashboard with all of our KPIs. So at a glance, we can see how much revenue have we generated this month? What's our monthly recurring revenue? How many new customers have we onboarded? How many hot leads do we have that we're currently talking to? So lots of good things about ClickUp. Paige, thank you for giving that advice for listeners, because you're right. It's something that's actionable and everybody must have it in place or they're not being strategic and intentional with their growth. So I love those perspectives. Paige, as we come to the end of this episode, I obviously always invite listeners to check out what our guests are doing, because you're doing so much awesome work and it's cool to hear about your own entrepreneurial growth as well. So at this point, I want to open the floor to you and let you tell listeners where they can follow what you're doing and also check out your company, Panoramic Projects.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate that. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can follow my Panoramic Project Consulting page on LinkedIn. I also want to invite, being a female consultant is pretty rare. I always love doing mentoring and helping, young women really break into the tech community. So if you ever want to, just pick my brain or just kind of talk about your own company, I'm always happy to listen.
Yes, I love that offer, Paige. And I will personally say here on the air that that's one thing that my team adored about when we found your business is we can obviously tell how much you love women-led businesses and how much good you give back to the world in that regard. So listeners, check out Paige's website for sure. She mentioned her LinkedIn as well. Of course, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode, we're dropping the links down below that, whether you're listening on Spotify or iTunes. But her website is panoramic-projects.com. Find that link down below wherever it is that you're tuning in, and also find Paige on LinkedIn. Her business website or her business page on LinkedIn is also Panoramic Projects. So Paige, on behalf of the entire Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur community, thank you so much for coming on to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian, for having me. It was a blast.